The most common symptom of long COVID, according to pretty much every study that's looked at symptoms, is fatigue. But I would wager that even more common than that is the impact of long COVID on our state of mind. Living with long COVID can take you to some really, really dark places. And this was clearly such an issue early doors that it was only my third film on the subject that I addressed mental health. But now we're approaching 2 years in for many sufferers, and if anything, the problem is more acute, not less. So in this film, I have the pleasure of talking to clinical psychologist Sally Riggs, who has lent on her own experience of long COVID to develop 5 strategies for helping you cope when times are hard. In terms of spot-on practical advice, this is as good as it gets, so I hope you find it useful. I was wondering if we could just start off by telling us a little bit about your professional history and your relationship with long COVID.
Yes, so I am a psychologist. I trained in the UK at Royal Holloway and worked in the UK for a few years. My specialism is CBT for psychosis. So visions, voices, delusions, paranoia, nothing to do with chronic illness or long COVID. And I now live in New York City and have been there 10 years, been in the US 13 years. I contracted COVID in that final week before, I think it was the 20th of March that Cuomo called the rest in place order. So just missed the window to get home and get safe. And then in terms of my long COVID kind of journey, I'm a marathon runner, ultra marathon runner. So after about 10 days, I went out for a run, which is, what we do when we've been sick with a cold or even flu. And that classic, I've never experienced anything like it. Every cell in my body was screaming. That's what it felt like. Every old injury that I'd ever had was present again. And so after that, I didn't exercise and I took a lot longer to get back, but it just got worse and worse and worse. By the end of April, I was very fatigued. By the end of May, I was having chest pain when I ran. By August, I had stopped running. It really went from there.
So I think what we want to talk about today is something that is more universal than even fatigue with long haulers, and that is the impact of long COVID on our state of mind. And it doesn't really matter, even when you think you're out of the woods, you can slip back to some pretty difficult places. And for me, for example, Christmas Day, so that is 2 weeks ago, if that, I had a relapse. I was at my brother's house in Wales. I had to go upstairs in the afternoon and just lie in a dark room, curled up in a ball. And I didn't even have the energy to pull a cover over myself. And I was there shivering for about 3 or 4 hours because I simply couldn't do anything. If there'd been a little euthanasia button next to me, there's a decent chance I'd have pressed it. And that's not a good place to be in. It really isn't, especially when, a couple of weeks before that, I'd felt great. I'm on my way out of this. I can see the end of the tunnel and everything's fine. Yeah. So I think having coping strategies for how to handle the difficulties of what this does to your life and your mental health and everything like that is something that we're all desperate for them. And so I was wondering if you could maybe talk us through the first of your we'll introduce the concept a little bit of what you do and then maybe talk about the first one.
Absolutely. As a psychologist now that I am, and I certainly wouldn't say I'm 100% recovered. I think for all of us, it's a journey. But I certainly turned a corner in September. And for me, it was some sort of psychological framework stuff that really was the light bulb moment that has been very helpful to me. And I can definitely talk more about that. But I think it's now that I'm feeling a little bit better and wanting to kind of give back, as someone who has always been very persistent in my lifetime with a lot of things. And someone says to me, you can't do something. And I'm like, great, watch me do it. And yet for me, this whole 2-year journey has had moments of hopelessness and real despair and thinking about, the millions of other people with long COVID. We know it's a medical thing. We know that there are some little bits and pieces of answers that are coming, but we have to keep going in the meantime. And that is really difficult. And I think that the first thing I would want to say is, certainly for me, there are lots of really great resources out there about things to do and how to manage this. And at the same time, because what we're going through has had an effect on us psychologically, it's not always easy to access those things. Your wonderful video from a few months back where you were talking to Tina Pierce about things that you had done psychologically that were really great. And I was just looking at that again this morning and thinking, sometimes I look at things like that in a bad moment and think, you know, pardon my French, but fuck that. I'm not doing that. You know, I'm not in the headspace to do it in that moment. And another great resource, Susie Bolt's Facebook, you know, yoga stuff. Wonderful, wonderful. She talks a lot about fight or flight and how to get out of fight or flight and all of her great classes. But sometimes we're just not in the headspace to be able to, you know, that classic, you need to think positive. Yeah, I know that, but I can't do that right now. So, you know, how do I keep going? And I think the first thing for me that was really, really helpful, that another psychologist who specializes in chronic illness shared with me, and I've kind of taken it on, is that trusting your gut thing, that we all, somewhere deep down, our bodies do know what we need here. And we're being bombarded. This doctor says this doctor says that, this physio, this OT. And then you go on, you know, the internet and all the Facebook groups and all of that, you know, all of your wonderful resources. And where do I start and who do I trust? Taking that moment of quiet to just stop and be present and pay attention to what your body is telling you. And if your body is telling you, I can't do this right now, that's okay. And I think you did a wonderful job of highlighting all of the self-criticism and the negative thoughts that we all are very susceptible to, and that can also be very, very much exacerbated with long COVID. That also is informative. You know, when I'm having the thoughts, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do gratitude? Why can't I do self-compassion? Can't I do yoga? That's the moment that I need to stop and say, wait a second. All of these wonderful things that you are doing, if you just need to lie down right now, that's great. If you just need to watch trashy TV right now, that's great. And I know, you know, again, we get the watching TV isn't really resting, or if you're on Facebook right now, put down your phone and don't look at Facebook. But maybe that's just what you need to do today. So I think it's that trusting your gut piece. And for me, you know, it's been a journey, and I know that you shared a lot of your journey in terms of, you know, which doctors do I go with? And in America, that oftentimes involves a lot of money. You've paid $800 for a consultation. And then you're told what the treatment's going to be, and your gut is telling you this is not right for me. Being able to honor that and just say, no, this is not right for me. I'm not going to do that. Even though I wasted almost $1,000 talking to this person, it got me something. Paying attention to our bodies and being where we are and going from there is the most important starting point, I think.
And I think acceptance is a huge part of that too, right?
Yeah.
Because I know I give myself a hard time. I'm forever beating myself up about I should be doing this, I should be doing that. Why am I not doing this better? And there are times where I am actually good at doing that first thing you mentioned of going, it's okay. All I need to do right now is X or whatever it is. And I'm just accepting that it's okay for that to be enough, and actually not think I should be doing X, Y, and Z. Because for the whole of the rest of my life prior to COVID, I lived in a perpetual state of I need to be doing X, Y, and Z. Like my list of what I need to do was incredibly long, and I'd battle through it. And every day was in this sort of state of frenzy almost. And I think long COVID, if it's taught me anything, has taught me an ability to be okay with just being, you know, as opposed to doing. And I think that's a challenge.
Sometimes, sometimes that means that you are just being in despair, and that's awful. But it's also survivable. And, and I think that also brings me to the second thing, which is, and sort of overlaps, is that the feelings-based piece. And as a psychologist, I know we get a bad rap for making people feel their feelings. And at the same time, as a psychologist, I'm not very good at feeling my own feelings. And there's a lot of feelings with this. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of grief around the things that we've lost. And the worry, I certainly had this, and I'm sure you did too, Jez, that when we feel a very strong feeling, that's also going to affect our nervous system, and it's also going to make us relapse. And so you feel the feeling coming on and you're like, no, I need to stop it because I don't have time for this right now. I'm doing a bit better and I've got to teach a workshop next week. And yet actually, if we just stop and be in that feeling, we get it over with quicker, and then we can get back to where we want to be. And, to really preface this, because I know, and you've also highlighted in previous videos, I'm not in any way suggesting that this is a psychological manifestation or this is hypochondria or any of those things. Long COVID clearly has a very medical basis. And yet, psychologically, when we don't feel our feelings, medical things happen, whether it's chronic pain or whether it's other kinds of even, autonomic things that can happen if we don't stop and feel our feelings. I was very, very angry for a very, very long time about this, and the various people that I thought were responsible, including presidents and governors and all the rest of it. We need to stop and let ourselves go through that. And if that involves, opening up your laptop and writing it out for 20 minutes or 30 minutes just to get it all out, that is also really helpful of a strategy. Yeah.
I couldn't agree with this one more strongly. I think whatever you can do to exhume, because the thing is as well with this is that some of those feelings are present and now, and some of them may also trigger old ancient stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to some degree, it all has to come out. And like when you're ill and you're sort of hanging over the porcelain and vomiting, it's not a nice experience. Like literally, but figuratively, emotionally, doing the emotional equivalent of that is also not very pleasant. And there's a lot of resistance in us sometimes to letting go of that stuff. And it might manifest itself with me. I manifest out in tears a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I might notice in any given day, I'm a bit jittery and I can't focus and I can't do anything. And I go, you know what? Sit down, put on one of my meditation apps. And I know that's a cue for me to be able to start breathing and to let some of this emotion out. And I might spend 10 to 15 minutes crying. And it's horrible. And I don't enjoy that 10 to 15 minutes. And for every single second of that, I want to turn off the app, stand up and go and do something else. But I kind of know that my ultimate well-being is dependent on me getting that stuff out. And when I've made the biggest steps forward in my long COVID journey, it feels like it's come off the back of letting out a lot of stuff, whether it's current, recent anger, bitterness, sadness, grief, or old stuff that's connected to it. And whatever you need to do, I think, to help you get those emotions out, because for everybody it's going to be a little bit different. I think do it.
Yeah.
No matter
and
how
I think,
hard it feels.
The other thing, and I know that we also kind of share this, Jez, in terms of our, history of exercise, historically for me, that's how I got my emotions out. And when that's been taken away from you to begin with, it's really tough, because every time you have a feeling, then it's followed with, but I would go for a run and I can't now because I can't go for a run. So, then you get the double anger and the metacognitions and all of that, which is not fun. And I think for all of us, whatever your thing was before that's been taken away from you, and for all of us, it's many things that have been taken away. Each time we're reminded of that. And so that's why it's more painful, and we have to, and yet, something that, even though I can't keep it in my mind in the moment, does become true every time when you're feeling an actual feeling, not a mood, because moods are slightly different, but actual feelings like anger and sadness and hopelessness really only have a life of about maximum 40 minutes at that really, really, really strong intensity. And after that, if you let yourself be in it for that full 40 minutes, it has to change. And those moments when I start to see the feeling go away, I'm like, oh yeah, look at that. And yet at the beginning, every time it's excruciating and I don't want to go in there. And yet that's, if we can remind ourselves, you just have to keep going through that, you know, that 1 hour max thing, it cannot remain at that maximum point. And each time it is cathartic and we make progress in our bodies.
I think that's a really good point, that we don't have to be scared of those feelings because they are by their nature transient. You're not going to get stuck in there. No. By letting that feeling exist, you're actually getting it out of you, and you are going to be, as you say, feeling a lot better, and it is a cathartic process. The one thing I would say as well that has helped me get a bunch of stuff out was actually working with a breathwork practitioner. And having an hour with a breathwork practitioner helped get things out that were way deeper, and the volume of stuff that came out was greater than I could have achieved by myself. And there's something about the way that you can work with a breathwork practitioner that, I don't know, helps you access some really deep emotional core stuff. And and if anybody's sort of thinking, oh, I can't do this, I don't feel like I can get my, you know, I don't feel like I can get to that place where I let these feelings out, I would encourage you to consider that, because I know other people too who've tried it and been surprised at just how effective it is at emotional release.
Yeah, that's a really great top tip, Jess. Personally, I've struggled with the breathwork thing. I tried it at the beginning and I wasn't doing very well, and I stopped. And then I tried it again when I started working with a course coach, and then got sort of sidetracked with some other things. So that's a nice reminder that that's definitely something to revisit.
Yeah, I mean, it works on 2 levels for me. It calms down the nervous system, and it also, well, breath work when done by yourself generally in the day helps calm down the nervous system. Yeah. But when done in that sort of environment with a practitioner, that's very good for emotional.
Then it's and that's a nice segue into my third point, which is thinking about the fight or flight piece. So, you know, we've heard about this a lot. You know, as a psychologist, I think even in our clinical training, we don't really go into it in a ton of detail. I think it's more sort of in school, you learn about parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. And then we don't really think that much about it again. And so much has been said about fight or flight and trying to get back to rest or digest. But very interestingly, and this was really the start of my, you know, the beginning of my consistent recovery, is that there's a chap in the US, Stephen Porges, who has done a lot of research on the nervous system and actually figured out from the biological mechanisms, there are actually 3 processes. So we've got fight or flight and rest and digest, but we've also got a third, which is immobilization. And so instead of being a balance between these 2, it's more like a ladder. And for any of us who've had that chronic fatigue moment or months and months and months, that's immobilization. When you've been in fight or flight long enough that your body just cannot keep going because it's not meant to be permanently there, and it just shuts down. And it shuts down every organ, you know, the brain fog. You can't, I mean, the 2 hours to get out of bed, and people think you're just making it up, but it really is immobilization. And for me, what was so helpful was this guy, Stephen Porges, has also created a music auditory intervention, which works on your middle ear, which is obviously connected to that vagus nerve pathway, that helps you get back into rest and digest. And you listen to about 15 minutes a day of this kind of, it's some Motown music and some other kind of 60s and 70s stuff, but that has been kind of frequency hijacked so that it works on your middle ear. And for me, that was the game changer. And all of this stuff around, you know, all of the psychological practices that are beneficial to us, and having had a long period where I couldn't really access any of them. And then all of those negative thoughts come in again. What's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? I should be doing this. that when you experience something that's a little bit more powerful, that's actually getting your body out of immobilization and back into rest and digest. And that's really for me when the insomnia stopped, when I was able to finally start sleeping through the night most of the time and really beginning to recover, was that intervention. And this idea of the polyvagal theory, i.e. those 3 levels as opposed to just 2, for me has been the kind of revolutionary piece. And then that sort of permission, why couldn't I do this before? Oh, that's why, because my body and my brain was so shut down that I couldn't access all those other wonderful psychological things that I know, like gratitude, like compassion. Even acceptance is hard to do when you're in immobilization. Really all you've got is just those, that fatigue, the acute symptoms, and those horrible feelings. So I know we talk a lot about fight or flight, but I think the bit that hasn't been spoken about enough, in my understanding, in long COVID circles, is this polyvagal theory and the idea of you're not just going from sympathetic to parasympathetic, that you have to be thinking about these 3 levels or going upwards. And how do I move myself? And you will go up and down, like when I flew to London for Christmas, and that was a big stress on my body, and I'm noticing sympathetic being activated, and I know that immobilization is coming, and it's hard to in the moment snap out of it, but understanding that framework and knowing that I'm getting better at moving back up that ladder and getting back to those moments, when the gratitude is there, which is so overwhelmingly helpful and wonderful. That for me has been a real step forward.
Is there somewhere that people can go to have a look at something describing the 3 levels, and where would they access this 15 minutes of music?
Yeah, so really great questions. So the music intervention, which is 5 hours total, is available through clinicians. So he has made it that licensed clinicians pretty much worldwide can apply to purchase it for their practice and then use it with their clients. And I, in fact, did sign up in December and have gone through the training now. So there are a few practitioners in the UK. Jez, I'm going to have to look up the website.
That's fine. We'll stick it in the description.
Yeah. There's a great website that shows you all about, it's called the Safe and Sound Protocol.
Right. Okay.
Which is essentially about getting you to feel safe again through the sound intervention. There's a couple of practitioners in the UK that do it, but there's a whole number, and through the website there is a directory. So if you're looking to work with somebody, and he has published a lot of books. There's a social worker in the US called Deb Dunner who has written a lot of clinician books, and also I think there may be one that's almost kind of self-helpy for straight to people who are wanting to try it themselves at home.
My equivalent of that is I've got an Alpha Stim machine, but you can also get Vagal 10s things as well. Like the Vagal 10s cost about £30 on eBay, I think. And for me, I can tell that's working in terms of pulling me out of sympathetic, because I put it on, I turn it up to like max power, and within 30 seconds I'm having these huge like fits of yawning, as in my body's just suddenly been pulled back into this parasympathetic thing. I'm like, my God, I needed that, because otherwise you end up in the sympathetic for too long, and then immobilization.
Yeah, immobilization is coming. The other thing that you can notice when it's working is because there is facial nerves that also connect to the vagal system, you get that sort of tingling in your face, which lets you know that it's working, which is always, for me, is that moment of like, yes, okay, I'm not going into immobilization, I'm getting out of this. Yeah. And the Alpha Stim is about 200 quid, is that right?
Yeah, it's a bit more expensive. Yeah. But I think there's all sorts of other tricks that you can do to reset the vagus nerve as well. On YouTube, there's a million breathing exercises and
Yeah.
what you do with your head and things like that. So, but I think
Yeah.
a lot of people who'll be watching this will be familiar with this as a subject because it's been talked about quite a lot in the long COVID community.
And I think for me, I think it was also that sort of, again, just the realization I tried a lot of that stuff off of YouTube and it wasn't really going anywhere, and having those kind of negative thoughts. And really and truly, if you're stuck down in immobilization, those are not going to be powerful enough. You know, if you're having a little bit of sympathetic trouble, to kick yourself back up into parasympathetic, that, you know, the moving your head or whatever it is, the yawning, that's going to be helpful. But if you're really down there in immobilization like we are, it's something a bit more powerful, like the alpha stim or the safe and sound protocol, that is really going to get you shifted. And for me, that was, again, just being able to say, oh, it wasn't my fault that I was stuck there. You know, that is the most helpful thing. There's a reason for this. And now that I understand that, I'm not beating myself up and making it worse anymore.
Yeah. What I really like about these sort of strategies is just how simple they are. This isn't like a sort of a really complex set of instructions. It's just, and I'm at the end of this, I'm going to write them all down on a Post-it and I'm going to stick it onto my computer screen, and I'll just have them there in front of me just to remind myself of them, because they are so simple and so, but yet important and profound at the same time. Yeah.
And our brains can't do the complicated stuff when we're in the brain fog either. No. That's the trouble. Yeah. So it's just remembering. And I like you, I have, I'm not in my apartment at home at the minute, but when I am, my bathroom mirror, I have about 20 Post-it notes now of little things to remind myself that are just, you know, that similar thing that is really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. So what's next? What's number 4?
So the next one, having been able to figure out the fight or flight thing, and if you have been able to then get back to parasympathetic more frequently, then there's space to do the more complex psychological stuff. And for me, that's finding your purpose, reconnecting with your purpose, and getting that persistence back again. And, you know, I know that you've been doing this all along, and that I'm sure has been really helpful for you, having a purpose to keep going through all of it. And, you know, I was still working as a psychologist, although I definitely had moments where I thought, I am done with this. I don't want to do this anymore. And coming back into my purpose again, as I was beginning to get into that parasympathetic more frequently, and thinking about, oh, I guess this means now I'm also working with long COVID. And what does that mean in terms of, you know, speaking and advocacy. And I've lined up a few grand rounds in the US when I get back to talk to medical professionals, essentially with the message, your patients have this and you need to not gaslight them, because, you know, we also need to get that message out there too. And having that, you know, what is my purpose, remembering my purpose, is it going back to an old purpose? Is it finding a new purpose? For me, I lived in Japan a long time ago after undergrad. So Japanese concepts are always super cool to me. And I came across this word ikigai, which basically means finding your purpose, and spent a lot of time kind of going through the steps of how you get to that. And whatever journey you take and whatever route you go down, having something that gets you out of bed in the morning and a reason to keep going, because we have to keep going. And even if the purpose is just getting better, that is really powerful. But we can't do it before we get out fight or flight. If you're down there in immobilization trying to find your purpose, that's not going to happen. And again, with the final step, which is connecting with your people, we do need connection with other people to keep us in parasympathetic. And I know that connection with people has been so hard for everybody with long COVID, because we've had negative reactions from friends. We've lost, you know, connections with family members and relatives because they don't quite understand what we're going through. Once we get back up there again, being able to reconnect with people, finding your gang or whatever it is to keep you going, is the final step. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're well enough to get out there and be seeing people. And certainly I know in London right now, people are not really socializing a lot because it's not super safe. But, you know, going back to messaging people and connecting with people, I have definitely found, once I got back into rest and digest a little bit more, that I was also able to reach out to people in a way that I could be there for them again. And I don't know if you went through this, Jez, but for a very long time, you know, I was so unwell that I didn't have any resources to even ask someone else how they were doing, because I could barely get through my day.
You don't have the emotional bandwidth, right?
Exactly.
Your emotional bandwidth is absolutely shot to bits, and you can't deal with other people's problems because yours are overwhelming. And it almost sounds selfish, but it's just it's a physical, almost a physical problem. You simply don't have enough hands to carry all the plates. You know? Exactly.
Yeah. And that can create problems, because then you get people, you know, who do you think you are? I'm going through the pandemic too. This is not a competition. Reams of text messages, people listing off what's wrong with them. And you're just thinking, I'm sorry, but compared to what I'm going through, that is nothing. And when we get back to that space again, when we can be there for other people and ask them how they're doing, and maybe even listen to what they're going through and not be having those thoughts, again, that perpetuates and helps you stay in parasympathetic and continue that recovery process.
Yeah, I think, again, this one is really important. And as much as on the outside, it might have looked like I have had a purpose through all of this, there have been large periods where I haven't really quite had a handle on it, and I've found myself a little bit fragmented, and I don't think that's particularly helpful. The people I know who did seem to, and this is anecdotally, hasn't done any sort of research on this, but the people who did manage to get out of long COVID at 6 months, 9 months, 12 months or whatever, were the people who's put their sole focus on getting better. And that generally tended to be get the fuck out of wherever they were, go to somewhere where there weren't any of the normal pressures, there weren't any of the normal habits, and just spend 1, 2, 3 months somewhere completely different, where all they had to do was be responsible for themselves. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to work for everybody, because I know people have tried it and it hasn't worked, but there does seem to be a correlation with people who've made their focus to basically try and forget about the rest of the frippery of life. And I say frippery, some of it's important, but, you know, to try and remove the pressures and to try and just create a safe space where the purpose, it's okay to accept that that's all that you can do right now. So this ties into your first one too, right?
Yeah. Trusting your gut. Yeah. And in a way, that is a kind of purpose, Jez. I think you're absolutely right. Once you're getting to that stage where you can have gratitude again and you can be around people, again, going back to polyvagal theory, this idea of co-regulation, interacting with other humans, actually does keep us in rest and digest. And so being able to reconnect with people that are important to you, and that may be a different network than it was before. And it may be some folks who've had long COVID and other chronic illnesses that, we weren't aware of in the past. Certainly, I have discovered within my friendship group all kinds of autoimmune and other things that people have been dealing with for years and never really spoken to me about, because I wasn't really thinking about those things. And now I understand those worlds a lot more because I've been in them for 2 years. And so kind of connecting with that has been great. I
think the important thing here as well is, without sounding too cynical about it, being selective about the people you connect with.
Yes.
Because there are people in all of our lives who have I'm not judging those people, but there may be a slightly aggravational nature to that relationship, which when you're well is fine. You can deal with one of those high drama friendships or relationships or whatever when you're well. But when you're not well, I think try to be honest with yourself about the kinds of people who make you feel comfortable and safe and accept you for you rather than querying you for you. That would be my tip there, is if there are people who you never quite feel that they believe you, but those probably aren't the people to connect with, because you're just going to get stressed in that scenario.
No, I think it's connecting with your people is kind of an emphasis on the putting together your support team, your your gang, your tribe, whatever you call it, with that emphasis on it has to be mutually supportive and not just the toxic people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sally, I think this has been incredibly important and really fascinating for me. And what I would like to do, if it's okay with you, would be to ask people to put any questions they've got about this stuff in the comments, and then maybe we could have another chat in a few weeks, and maybe just talk through some of the issues that this raises, if that would be okay.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Yeah. Super.
Perfect. So there you have it. To sum up, number one, listen to your gut. Your body will tell you what it needs, and whatever it is, that's okay. Number two, let the feelings you have exist and don't bottle them. If you can, let them out, however unpleasant the experience might be. It will only be temporary, and then they're gone. Once they're gone, the physiological tension that those feelings are making your body store will be gone too, and it will help your body calm down and get back into that parasympathetic state. Number three, consider the third part of the nervous system trilemma as immobilization, and that early preemptive action to calm a nervous system down can help you ending up there. And let's face it, we all have ended up there. Number four, try and find a purpose that keeps you going. If you have too many things going on, consider trimming them down and being clear about what you need to be doing at the moment. It might be that just getting better is the only item on the list, and that's absolutely fine. Number five, connect with your people. If you can't manage a phone call, then a few texts is of course absolutely fine. The thing is, as humans, we are all programmed to be social creatures, and we don't tend to do well when isolated. Equally, it is worth choosing who you want to be your people now, because it may well be different than it was pre-COVID. As I said in the discussion, what I like so much about these strategies is that they're so simple. They're definitely going up on my wall behind my computer screen. When things are hard, we don't need complex ideas or exercises to do. Sometimes it's just doing the simple things right that will get us through. And I hope that these tips will help a bunch of you out there too. And if you do have any questions on this, please do leave them in the comments, and I'll speak to Sally again in the coming weeks and we can address them then. Until then, look after yourselves, and Happy New Year. I hope that in 2022, all of us get a hell of a lot better.